Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Tim. This is Random Awesome. And today I would like to tell you some scary stories. Um, yeah, I'm a huge film buff, but horror is my favorite genre by far. I love horror, all things horror. Um, Always have. Don't really know why. I just love it. Can't get enough. So it's always cool when things happen in my own life, in reality, that are a little bit freaky. So I'm going to tell you a few stories about things that have actually happened to me in my life. Now, I give you a 100% guarantee that I have not exaggerated or embellished these stories in any way. I will be telling them to you 100% the way that they actually happened. Now, I am not saying that this is any sort of proof of anything supernatural or whatever. I'm kind of a skeptic myself. I definitely believe in the possibility of supernatural things, but I'm also kind of the person that tends to only believe in what I can actually see or what has been proven to me in some sort of way. So, though I may not have a rational explanation for these occurrences that I'm going to tell you about, that doesn't mean that there isn't a logical scientific explanation for them. Just means that I couldn't figure out what that explanation might be. So anyway, you can come to your own conclusions after hearing these stories. You can decide if you think it was truly supernatural or if maybe there was some other possible explanation for them. Anyway, okay. Let's get down to the storytelling here. Now, I didn't write any of this down or memorize anything, so I'm just winging it here, just off the top of my head. So, bear with me. I might have to pause for a second and think about, whatever. But anyway, this first story, this happened when I was 22, I believe. I'm 35 now, just so you know. This was a while ago. I had moved in with some friends of mine, and it was my friend, I don't know if I should use actual names here. Probably not. So I'm just going to say it was a male and female who I moved in with, a couple, and they had some kids. And we were moving into the guy's grandparents' house. But they had his grandfather had passed away years ago, and his grandmother had just passed away, left the house to his older sister, and she rented the house out to us. So, anyway, but his grandparents had lived there for a very long time. It was a very old house. His grandfather had died in the house. Other people had probably died in the house. We're not really sure 100% on that. But there have definitely been, from what I heard, there have been a few strange occurrences that have happened in that house over the years. But this is one that I saw with my own eyes. Actually, there's two separate occurrences that I'm going to tell you about, because they both happened in this house, pretty close to each other. Both events were pretty close to each other. Anyway, I think it was the day we moved in is when this first thing happened. We had gotten some help moving from, a few of our friends, and we were all sort of taking a break, and we were sitting in the living room just talking, hanging out, whatever. And all of a sudden, one of the kids' toys, they had a 6-month-old daughter at the time, one of her toys, which was one of those real basic, like baby toys that you touch some colored thing on it and it lights up and makes a sound. It started doing that as if someone was touching it. It was across the room from all of us. No one was anywhere near it. And it just started, the different things started lighting up and playing the sound just randomly, and it would be like there'd be like three sounds or whatever, you know, three lights, three sounds, like right in a row, and then it would stop for a few minutes, and then all of a sudden there would be like two more, and then it would stop for a few minutes, and then there'd be like four. You know what I mean? I don't know exactly, you know, how many. I don't remember. It was years ago. But the point is that this toy was going off by itself, and it's something that you have to be touching in order for it to do that, and no one was anywhere near it. So now that can be explained by, you know, just a malfunction with the toy. So we were all kind of a little bit freaked out by it, you know, but mostly we just thought it was kind of funny and weird. So we decided to go and get it and take the batteries out. So we did that. Almost immediately after we took the batteries out, it started going off again. So that kind of started to actually freak us out. We were like, oh, okay, well, even if the toy was broken or malfunctioning, it can't be doing that without batteries in it. I mean, there's no power going to the toy. It can't light up or make a sound without any power. So, yeah, one of our friends started getting really creeped out about it. She actually started crying. She was so scared that she started crying and just wanted to leave the house. So I think she left, and the toy did that off and on throughout the rest of that day, and then it just didn't do it again after that. So I don't know if there's some other explanation for that, but that was just something that we all thought was a little weird, you know? I mean, toys shouldn't be lighting up and making sounds if they have no batteries in them. So yeah, that was the first thing. The second thing is a little bit creepier, and a little bit more difficult to explain. So one night I was up late with the female friend. Her boyfriend was asleep. All the kids were asleep. We were in the living room watching a scary movie in the dark. She too was a huge horror fan, so we watched a lot of scary movies. Anyway, she was sitting on the couch. I was sitting in a chair on the opposite end of the room, and we're just watching TV. There's no lights on except for the light of the TV. And in the living room there, we had these really thick curtains, like sort of old-fashioned type, just really thick fabric curtains. And all of a sudden, we heard a sound and saw the curtains move a little bit. And to us, it looked and sounded as if somebody had thrown something small, like a quarter, something about the size and weight of a quarter. I'll just say that. I mean, I can't really think of anything else to compare it to. But yeah, it sounded and it looked like somebody had thrown something like that at the curtain. We heard it clearly hit the curtain. We saw the curtain move. And it just sort of caught us off guard. We were like, okay, what was that? So we paused our movie, turned on the lights, and went over to investigate. Well, we figured we'd find some little object on the floor. Something, you know, if something had been thrown at the curtain, it would have hit the curtain and then fell on the floor, right? There was nothing at all. We looked around for like 5 minutes, all over the floor and everything. There was nothing anywhere around there. So we figured, okay, you know, well, maybe somebody woke up and is just trying to mess with us. Now, the bedrooms were located right behind where I was sitting in the living room, basically. I was right next to the doorway or the entryway to the hall. There was no actual door on it. It was just a, you know, entryway into the hall. And to the left was the kids' rooms. To the right, was where the girl's boyfriend was sleeping. So there really wouldn't, I was sitting, you know, right by that doorway. So there's really no way anyone could have woken up, come out into the hall, you know, stood in that doorway and thrown something at the curtain without me noticing it. I mean, I was sitting right there. There's no way that could have happened. But we still decided to check out that possibility. So she went in and checked on her boyfriend. He was fast asleep and snoring. So, and I mean, she even checked to make sure he wasn't just faking it or whatever, and there was no way. He was asleep. All the kids were asleep. So yeah, there wasn't really any sort of explanation for it. I mean, we heard it, we saw it. There was nothing there. There was nothing to explain what could have caused that sound and that particular sort of movement with those curtains. It was just something that was really weird. So it kind of freaked us out a little bit. So I decided that I would go sit on the couch next to her because I was a little freaked out. So that's what I did, and we started our movie again. About 5 minutes later, a rocking chair that was about 2 feet away from the couch, so about 2 or 3 feet from where we were sitting, started rocking. And it didn't start slow and then build up and then gradually slow back down. It just immediately out of nowhere started steadily rocking. There were no windows open, no doors open, no draft whatsoever. This chair just randomly started rocking. And we were sort of dumbfounded by that. There was no explanation for it whatsoever. It was really, really weird, really, really scary, and we didn't even know what to say or do or how to react. We both just sat there without saying anything to each other. As soon as it started rocking, we both just looked over at it, and we just stared at it for about 10 minutes. Our eyes were glued to that chair in complete silence. We stared at it as it rocked back and forth for 10 minutes, and then it suddenly stopped. It didn't gradually stop. It full on rocking back and forth, and then 10 minutes later, just bam, it stops. At that point, she looked at me, said, "Well, that's it. I'm going to bed. You're on your own." I had to sleep in the living room, and I was not happy with that. Now, I did have a bedroom, but my bedroom was on the opposite end of the house of all the other bedrooms, and it was up in an attic that was really, really dark and really, really, really creepy. And I hated sleeping up there in general, but that night I was definitely not sleeping up in the attic. So, I really had no other choice but to sleep in the living room where all this weird crap was happening. So she went to bed. I got kind of irritated with her for leaving me alone out there in that haunted living room. But luckily, that was the end of it. Nothing else happened after that. I think I moved out of the house several months later. They moved out about a year or so later. Yeah, and nothing else really weird happened in that house. But, what did happen there was creepy. I have no explanation for it. I'm a pretty intelligent guy, and I looked for any sort of explanation I could find, and there just wasn't any. I couldn't come up with anything to explain what had happened, especially with the rocking chair. That was just crazy. So, anyway, moving on. Next story. This isn't really a supernatural thing or ghost thing or anything like that. It's more of an extraterrestrial thing. Now again, I'm skeptical about that or whatever, but I definitely tend to lean toward the belief that we're not alone in the universe. I mean, there's so many, millions of galaxies and millions of planets in those galaxies and everything. Like, what are all those other planets for if there's not any other life in the universe? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me. There has to be life somewhere. But, again, I haven't seen it with my own eyes. I haven't seen any sort of definitive proof of it. So there's going to be a little bit of skepticism. But anyway, this is something I can't really explain. And again, there are two events, and they both happen in pretty much the same place. I grew up on the Oregon coast, and there's a beach called Sunset Beach in the town where I lived. Beautiful beach. I was out there one day with a couple friends, and we saw a strange object in the sky, just a little thing. You know, it kind of looked like an airplane, but it didn't move like an airplane. It just sort of hovered in one spot in the sky for a few minutes, and then all of a sudden it disappeared and reappeared somewhere else in the sky, pretty far from where it had originally been. It did that 2 or 3 times and then just suddenly vanished, and we didn't see it again after that. Now, it could have been something, you know, scientific, or, you know, there could be some logical explanation to it, but we couldn't figure out what that explanation might be. It just wasn't, you know, I don't know of anything that can disappear from one location, teleport to some other location in the sky and reappear and then disappear altogether. I don't know. Is there an explanation? Maybe. I have no idea, but I couldn't think of what it was. And that was a long time ago. So, I mean, we were you know, this was 15 years ago. So, I mean, we didn't have any sort of technology that would even come close to being able to do that. As far as I know, at least, you know, I don't know. Anyway, jump to several years later, that same beach, Sunset Beach, they also have a campground there. And I was homeless for a little while and living in a tent. And I had a campsite at that campground that I stayed at for a few days. And one day I was in my tent, you know, like reading a book or something, and I heard a really, really, really loud noise outside. Now, it sounded like a jet engine, but it didn't sound like a jet flying overhead. That, you know, it was it was that same sort of sound, but amplified by like 100 times. I mean, it was really, really, really loud. A lot louder than a typical jet flying overhead. But I just figured, you know, we do have an airport in that town. It's a small airport. You know, we don't get the really big airliners in there or anything. But yeah, I didn't go outside. I just, you know, I stayed in my tent. I heard the sound for several minutes. It lasted probably 5 minutes. And it didn't fade in. That's the thing that really got me. It didn't fade in and then fade out. It just started all of a sudden, really, really loud. And then after about 5 minutes, it just stopped. And I was like, okay, you know, that was kind of weird. Like, I couldn't really figure out what could have made that sound. So the next day, I heard it again. And I decided to go outside and try and see what it was making that sound. And again, I saw an object in the sky that was just sort of hovering in one place. And again, I couldn't tell. It looked just sort of like a plane flying overhead, like I said, but way too loud. I mean, it was so far up there. I don't know any plane or any jet that being as far away, as high up as it was, that could have made a sound that loud. You know, I mean, it was way too loud for the object to be as far away as it was. But anyway, it was just like a small object from my perspective in the sky. And again, it did basically the same thing as that other occurrence. It disappeared from one spot, appeared in another spot, disappeared, appeared in another spot, and then just disappeared altogether. When it disappeared altogether, the sound just stopped, went away. So that was pretty weird. I don't really have any explanation for that. And I was not the only one that thought it was weird. My parents ran an RV park at the time, and it was filled with mostly older people. And a lot of them, my mom said several of those people mentioned something about it, how they thought that there was just something really weird about it. So yeah, I'm not the only one. Even these really old people that tend to be really skeptical and don't believe in stuff like that, even they thought that it was really weird and they couldn't explain it either. So anyway, yeah, that was kind of creepy. Now, this last story that I have for you is, I saved this one for last because it may not have scared me as much as some of the other occurrences, but it was definitely like the creepiest one. I mean, to me, it's like one of those old campfire ghost stories that you hear that are just kind of ridiculous, and you don't really believe them ever. But this one actually happened to me. So yeah, it's just crazy. To this day, I have no explanation for it. Anyway, what happened? Again, this was a very long time ago. I think I was like 19, so it was like 16 years ago. I was staying with a friend of mine in my hometown in an apartment building. And one day he had to go talk to his landlord for some reason. I can't remember what it was, if he was paying his rent or what it was that he needed to talk to her about. But fact is, he had to go talk to her, and I went with him. Now, she lived in the building next door, which was also an apartment building that she ran or managed. So we went over there. We went into her apartment, and she was a little bit older, probably mid-60s to late 60s. Short, blondish hair, heavier set woman. And there was also an older man there, not quite as old as her, probably in his mid-50s or so, but sort of skinny, I guess, if I'm remembering it correctly. Again, it was a really long time ago. But anyway, we sat there. He paid his rent or did whatever it was we went there to do, but then we sat there for about half an hour and just visited with her. She was a really nice woman, and it turns out the man that was there was just a friend of hers who also did maintenance in the building. He was sort of a handyman, I guess. So anyway, no big deal about that, right? Just like a typical thing. We sat, we had a conversation with his landlord for about 30 minutes or so, and then we left, went back to his apartment. Now, jump to about a year later, a little less than a year later. I'm going to say maybe 9 months later. My friend no longer lived there, but I was in the market for an apartment. I was looking for an apartment, and I really liked the building. Not the building my friend lived in, but the one next door. The other building, it's the building that his landlord had lived in, and she also managed that building. So I decided one day to go and talk to her and see if there were any apartments available for rent. So I went there, I went up to her door, I knocked several times, never got an answer, rang the bell, nobody answered. So then as I was about to leave, I saw in another apartment a couple doors down, the door was open, and there was a woman there, and she asked me if she could help me with anything. It looked like she was cleaning out an empty apartment. And she was younger, probably early 40s. So not young, but younger than the older woman who was the landlord there. But she too had short blonde hair, but she was really thin and short. And she asked if she could help me with anything. I explained to her, yes, I'm looking to rent an apartment, and I was looking for the landlord. I said I met her a few months ago. And, she seemed really nice and everything, but, I knocked on her door and didn't get any answer. And the woman says, well, I'm the landlord. I manage this building. And I said, oh, well, how long have you been the landlord? And she said, oh, about 5 years or 10 years. And I was like, wait, okay. I said, I was here about 9 months ago, and I met the landlord here, and it wasn't you. It was this woman. I described her to this woman. I said she, had the shorter blondish hair. She was heavier set. There was this older gentleman there who did maintenance in the building, and he was a handyman and everything. And I said, and she lived in this apartment over here. I pointed out the apartment that I had been in when I met the landlord. And the woman says, well, the woman you're describing is my mother, and that's the apartment that she lived in, and she did manage this building, but she died 10 years ago, and I have run this building ever since. And she said the older man you spoke of was a friend of hers who did maintenance on the building, but he is also dead. Yeah. That I don't even know how I responded at that point. I think I was just like, oh, well, okay, that's weird, but so do you have any apartments available or something? I think she showed me an apartment or whatever. I didn't end up moving in there. But that's just something that was really creepy because I know I met this woman. I know we sat down and had a conversation for half an hour. I described the furnishings and the decor in the apartment to this other woman who is now the landlord. And she said, yeah, that is my mom's, or was my mom's apartment. You're describing it perfectly. But she has been dead for 10 years. And she said, and now, nobody is living in that apartment or something, or maybe somebody else was, but it definitely wasn't somebody that fit this description or anything like that. So yeah, I don't know if there's some explanation for it. I'm not going to swear, 100% that something supernatural was going on, but it was definitely creepy, and I definitely have no explanation for it. And it's definitely something that sounds like a campfire story, but it's not. It's an actual thing that happened to me. I met someone. Turns out that person died 10 years before I met them. So yeah, I don't know. Make of it what you will. I don't know. It creeped me out. I have no explanation. Anyway, those are my stories. Now, there have been plenty of other creepy things that have happened to me throughout my life, but not any that are significant enough to discuss, really. So they were things that were just little minor things that were kind of creepy to me, but wouldn't really be scary to you. So anyway, hope you enjoyed my stories. I'd appreciate hearing yours as well. So like, comment, share, whatever. Again, my name's Tim. This is randomAWESOME, and those were my scary stories. Peace out, and don't get eaten by monsters. Sorry, I can't find the stop button.